Welcome to this Enterprise Fleet Summit. I'm Thomas Watson, Enterprise Trucking Expert here at FreightWaves, and going to be talking about recruiting and demographics today. I'm going to be bringing on Ms. Marilyn Surber. She is a transportation advisor and leader with Tenstreet. You may know them as one of the biggest places to recruit your drivers. So we're going to be getting some great insight and knowledge about what's going on. Marilyn, pleasure to be talking to you. I know we have you on FreightWaves now all the time. It's super excited to have you for this fireside chat as well.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk today about the market and the changing demographics. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
We'll dive into the market part first. A lot of times people outside of trucking don't understand the craziness with in a down market. It feels like you get more applicants, but then when the market's really hot, there's tons of freight, it's harder to find drivers. Tell us a little bit about that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, so it's exactly right. Whenever there is a lot of capacity in the market from a driver standpoint, it usually means there is less capacity on the freight side. So drivers feel that at their companies. And so when they start to feel freight slowing down and miles start to change and things starts to change at their existing company, drivers kind of start voting with their feet. They start to go look for other jobs, and it floods the market with applications because people are searching kind of for thinking, oh, it's going to be better somewhere else. It's going to be, there's going to be more miles here, or maybe this regional is better. Traditionally, that seems not to be the case, and it kind of then just levels out, which is where we've gotten to now. And so it's just a very, it's an interesting market. And then whenever we're in a really good freight environment, frankly, like we were in for the last several years, up until the last 9 months, you have drivers they're making a ton of money, they're busy, they don't have time to apply for jobs, so there's not as many applications. You also see a lot of drivers start their own companies and get their own trucks and kind of lease on and do, lease operators and owner operators. You see a lot of that fluctuation in the market as well in a strong freight environment, which further compounds, right, less company, free driver applications in the market.
And I think it's really cool from a recruiting standpoint because typically I've seen some fleets split them for new drivers and experienced drivers. So a recruiting group will target drivers out of a CDL school or wish to help out if it's a large carrier. But then the existing drivers, I wonder if the applications change as well. Like now in this softer environment, I wonder if you're seeing more existing drivers and maybe less newer drivers coming in or vice versa.
So that's really interesting. And, the student driving and hiring drivers from training schools has really evolved over the last three to 5 years. So during COVID and even coming out of COVID, for the most part, it's still standing true, is a lot of different carriers are now hiring students or entry-level drivers. Forever, it was really just your top, people usually in that top 150 or top 200 fleets that you would see, and very rarely private fleets. And now, we see private fleets, we see larger fleets or even mid-sized fleets, local fleets starting to hire entry-level drivers. But it's interesting that you bring that up because we have started to measure now what is the tenure of drivers, that are looking for jobs. And it stands, if the longer a driver has been at a company, the less likely they are to leave. And that time just continues to go down the longer that they've been at a company. But you will see more drivers in that bucket leave as the economy shifts and changes.
I think it brings into the point of the demographics as well. It's fascinating. I heard back in the day, the average driver is between 45 and 55, predominantly male. But I do wonder now with changes and especially with the post-pandemic, is the very type of driver who's being recruited changing? Are younger drivers coming in, or are we still following this wave of people reaching a certain age?
So it's really interesting because the demographics are changing. We are seeing a once in a generation kind of shift in business. So now, to your point, when I first started talking about different generations in trucking was in 2015. And at the time, the average age of an over-the-road driver was 55, right? Now the average age of an over-the-road driver is 47. And so it's changed that much in just, less than 10 years. And what we see in our data is half of driver applications are 40 or younger. And that is a huge shift from where it was post-COVID. And so we were trending there anyways, but COVID really accelerated that process because folks retired early. Folks, if they were older, they went and did some other things. We've also seen and continue to see a huge push for technology and digitization and automation and all of those things in trucking. And all of that lends itself to being more friendly to younger generations. And so those demographics are changing. Millennials, which I'm a millennial, you probably are too, Thomas. I'm an older one, born in 1982, but I'm 40, right? So millennials are older now. And so they're kind of becoming that target demographic. And we now have another generation in the market, which is the iGens. And so those are folks that people really are kind of still calling millennials. It's like, oh, if you're a younger person, then you're a millennial. But we're dealing with two different generations now that couldn't be more different. And so, but we still see the average age of a student like coming into the industry in truck driving school is usually like between 33 and 37. So we're still getting a lot of second career folks, right? We're not, the majority of our folks are older. We're not getting a ton of the 22-year-olds. Like as soon as they turn 21, they're going to CDL school and hitting the road. We still are getting a little bit older person in their 30s before they're even thinking about trucking.
And I wonder what you see in terms of outreach as well, because it used to be back when I started in trucking in 14, it was always, here's a newer truck, you get a newer truck. And it was crazy to think that I'm a millennial myself. I'm thinking, well, why is it just, you're offering me just a truck? I wonder now, as you see the age go lower, is technology an offering, or what are fleets using as the carrot to try and lure in this new cadre of younger, more tech-savvy drivers?
So, great question. And it's a fascinating topic. And it's something that, I think companies have really started to pay attention to, and we've kind of accepted as an industry, I think, and are starting to really embrace the fact that this younger generation is who we need. And now starting to say, we want them, how do we get them? And so to your point about the truck and the pay, that's just kind of the baseline at this point to hire a driver. You have to have a decent equipment and you have to have good pay. And so it is more about the culture and about technology and what is your differentiator, because one of the things that we see now is people are doing more research initially before they apply for jobs. They're applying for less jobs up front than they used to. So it's a more educated consumer. It's not just, oh, I'm going to apply to all of these places. People are doing their research and finding out what about specific companies they like and that makes that different from other companies. And that's where they're going. And so you see companies doing influencer programs, and they're on TikTok and they're on Snapchat advertising for drivers. So if you're looking for, different generations are going to be on different forms of social media. And so you're starting to see people change not only what they're advertising, but where they're advertising. And so you really have to have a really targeted strategy these days, because you have to go to different places to get to different people.
And I think also looking at even changes in gender makeup, there was a recent 2023 Women in Trucking study, I think released a week or two ago. It mentioned, I think, around 12-ish% of driver respondents were now female when it used to be even lower. I'm curious to think, leading into we're seeing more females joining the ranks of drivers, is that causing folks and recruiters to change their tactics as well, based on the difference between what maybe a male driver is interested in and what a female driver is interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. And that we have that same data. So we're seeing now between 13 and 14% of driver applicants are women, which is double what it was even, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And so, yes, is the short answer. It's like there's a lot of attention being given to, like, what do women care about? They care about safety. They care about training. They care about security, what needs to be different from an equipment standpoint. And you have, FMCSA has a committee, just to study that, like what can make it safer for women. And so you see companies really focusing on those different things and changing policies. I mean, we see companies changing policies, whether it's to attract more women, more young people, more veterans. That's another group, right, that you can target really specifically. And so I think that is the recruiting trend and retention trend, is to say, okay, if I need to hire 100 drivers, what's the demographics of those drivers? And then how do I go specifically target those markets? It's no longer a one-size-fits-all approach to driver recruiting.
And that's what I'm curious about as well. If you have any advice for fleets that are maybe smaller, large fleets definitely have the data, the analytics, the purchasing power to send out, the information. For small fleets who are looking to hire and they're still using the old school strategy of 20 years ago, are there any immediate things they can do or look into that may make them more attractive as drivers are using portals and applications, and, filtering out companies who they want to put in?
Absolutely. I would say, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy for even saying this, but make sure you have an online application that's mobile first. Make sure that a driver can apply to your company online. That's kind of first things first. I think that you can, make sure you're doing that. And then also something that you can do pretty easily is you can engage on social media. So if you don't have a brand on social media and you're not recruiting on social media, that is definitely something that you need to be looking at and figuring out how you can do that. And when I say social media, I don't just mean like using Indeed. I mean, do you have a Facebook presence? Do you have an Instagram presence? Do you have a LinkedIn profile? Those types of things. Like, those are things that you need to have to be able to attract the next generation of worker and, really, and to retain them, because it's culture building as well, for your fleet.
And looking at the final part, retention as well. I wonder if you have the data, or I know retention used to be back in the day when I worked at a large carrier, we would hire somebody, first seat driver. Their average attrition rate was 50% would be gone within 6 months because of the issues with the lifestyle and what they're getting into. Do you see any data on some of the fleets, any best practices that fleets are doing to keep drivers in now that we live in this world where all it takes is a few angry influencers to potentially make your own employees be a little suspect?
And the trends are still the same. The earlier on in the driver's tenure, the more likely they are to leave your company, leave the company, and you still see the highest turnover, in the first 90 days and then, and from that 90 days to 6 month measure. But one of the things that fleets are doing to help really move the needle on retention is they're surveying their fleet. And so they're asking their fleet, what is it good for you? And then they're giving that feedback back to the fleet. So if you're going to survey your drivers, that's excellent, but you have to give them some type of response, because if you ask them questions and then you never tell them what you do with that information, you really just wind up pissing them off rather than, it being a retention issue. So ask your drivers' opinions and then give them that feedback. I think that is one of the things that companies can do, but also there's things that don't even cost any money, really just kind of cost manpower, especially in a market like this. Communication with your fleet becomes even more important for retention. So if a driver is sitting in a truck stop not moving, that is when they're going to apply for another job. Even if they know it may not be better somewhere else, in that moment, they are bored, they're upset, they don't know what's going on. Communicate with your drivers. Let them know, I'm working on this load or I'm working on this. An even bigger picture. I know it's tougher right now. My miles are slow. Drivers appreciate that honesty and they appreciate that communication. And so if you have the ability, to have the fleet managers or operations managers or recruiters, whoever that is in your organization, that can reach out to these guys and gals and just have those conversations, that goes a long way, especially in this market.
I feel like half the battle is just wanting to be heard and saying so. Marilyn, so excited to have you on and talk to you again. If folks want to reach out to you or learn more about Tenstreet, where can they get a hold of you?
They can go to tenstreet.com or email sales@tenstreet.com. I am on LinkedIn, or they can email me at marilyn.surber@tenstreet.com. Thanks so much for having us today.
It was a pleasure as well. A lot of good stuff to digest. And speaking of which, we have a lot of great content as well. If you missed this, check it out on the FreightWaves YouTube channel as well. It'll probably be released within a day. That's a wrap for this fireside chat. Stay tuned. More content coming up.